Ranking the top 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, let's get into it. We're going to kick off here at number 32 with Drake May. He's not in the league yet, but he's going to be here in a couple months as he's going to be the prime number 2 pick for the Washington Commanders. This is a guy that I think has elite size. He has an elite arm talent. I think this is a guy that, reminds me a lot of a Justin Herbert, maybe the ceiling of a Josh Allen. But I think, honestly, he might be my favorite quarterback in this draft class as I dive deeper and deeper into it. There's a lot of questions, a lot of prospect fatigue going around that some people have him falling out of their top 5 for the quarterback position. I think that's crazy. I think he is already a top 32 quarterback in the world today. But Amir, you're joining us here to do these rankings, and you also had Drake May at number 32. Your insight from the guy from UNC.
Yeah, so, the biggest, disrespect I keep seeing about Drake May is always going to be another Mitch Trubisky. When people tend to forget, this dude was almost a perfect recruit coming out of high school. Like, he could have went to any other college. He could have easily went to Georgia, Bama, Ohio State. It didn't matter. But the only reason why he chose North Carolina was because of his family background and family history. And just like you just said, he has a great size, arm talent, absolute cannon. And I think if you look at him and Jaylen Daniels, I think, his few years, in college, I think they were put more well together than, the whole entire, pretty much Jaylen Daniels' career as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at number 31, we have Sam Howell, and this is the perfect opportunity to explain to you guys. You see the green box here with the number 29 in it, and you see the red box next to it with 30. Amir, you're going to be in the red boxes. Those are your rankings. I am in the green, and basically, we all ranked the 32 quarterbacks, and I got the averages. That's how we got the list today. So if you guys see, we'll talk about these guys throughout the list, but some honorable mentions before we dive into Sam Howell. We have Desmond Ridder missed the list, of course, of starting quarterback in the league. Aiden O'Connell, of course, had a solid end to the season there for the Las Vegas Raiders. We have a guy like Jayden Daniels, of course, we can also throw on this list because there's another rookie on this list. I think you guys can pick up who that is. Guys like Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, and Gardner Minshew, we would have had on this list. But Amir and I say collectively, let's just kind of do the starting quarterbacks because it can get messy if we start including Gardner Minshew, into going that route. So guys like Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, Gardner Minshew would have a spot on this list, but we held them off just because they're technically not the starting quarterbacks for their teams. And of course, the biggest miss on this list is Tim Tebow, right? But when we get into number 31, Sam Howell. This is a guy that was the most sacked quarterback in the league last year, but he also had a Jameis Winston stat line. I think it was 21 touchdowns, 21 picks, something that we don't often see. But Sam Howell, he showed flashes, right? He showed flashes of greatness at times. This is a guy that led the league in passing yards for a majority of the season before he was eventually benched for Jacoby Brissett. But any additional thoughts here, Amir? I know he got benched, had a rough end to the season. We don't know where his future is, but your thoughts here about Sam Howell?
I think he's a gunslinger. When I look at him, he kind of reminds me of a younger Baker. He has heart. He kind of brings that grittiness that you want. I think the turnovers, was the biggest concern. But, he arguably had the worst O-line in football. So I think for him, it's kind of hard to rank him. Because 21 interceptions is pretty terrible. So, I think 31 for him is just perfect.
Yeah, there's only so much, there's only so many times you can get sacked or get hit before you just want to get the ball out of your hands. And being a young quarterback, sometimes you just put the ball in bad places in Sam Howell. But again, there's only so much you can take, getting hit every single play. At number 30, again, it's a little bit controversial, but we're going to have the can't miss prospect in this upcoming draft, a guy that, works the best, on platform, he throws the best off platform outside the pocket. He's just the can't miss prospect in this class. Of course, we're talking about Caleb Williams, quarterback out of USC. This is a guy that's going to be a Chicago Bear in a couple months. And I had him at 31. You had him at 28. A little bit of a disparity there, just a little bit. But your thoughts here about the eventual number one pick here in 2024?
Yeah, I think he's the best quarterback in the draft. I think that's non-negotiable. And I see some people kind of have Jayden Daniels and Drake May over him just because of, the way Caleb kind of ended, his college season. Despite USC probably having the worst defense in college football. I think he's the best in the draft class. I think it will also be disrespectful for me to move him any higher than 28. So I just kept him at 28.
I don't know, man. The Gators couldn't stop a nosebleed throughout 2023. Regardless, though, you have a great point there with Caleb Williams. He's going to be, he should be, depending on how his situation turns out. If he ends up in Chicago, I think he's going to have enough weapons around him. Of course, they have a solid offensive line. But the reason I think one of the biggest things that goes unnoticed about Caleb Williams is that he gets the ball out. He doesn't take many sacks. And that's why people kind of see a Patrick Mahomes resemblance.
Mm-hmm.
Because not only do you see the magical throws, but he gets the ball out of his hands. He doesn't take those negative plays. And if you don't take those plays, you can always keep your team in the game. And
And he's
that was
more
part of the
athletic than
reason.
Mahomes too.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and he's even more athletic than Mahomes too.
Yeah, at least at this point in their careers, right? But at number 29, we have Kenny Pickett. Of course, we're Browns fans,
Who?
so maybe this is a little bit of biased, but this is a team that took a chance on the hometown kid a couple years back out of Pitt, Kenny Pickett. I have him at 27. You have him at 31, below Sam Howell and Caleb Williams. So I'm the reason why he's at 29 here. The reason I have him over the guys below is that he's just won more games. He's proven that he can win, a lot throughout an entire season. And that's the only reason Caleb Williams and Drake May are so low is I know the talent's there, but I want to see them at the next level, right? Because the talent's one thing, it's one thing to have expectations, but it's another thing to live up to them. And so we're waiting on some of these guys at the bottom. But Kenny Pickett, he's a winner for the most part, right there in Pittsburgh. But he's just not a franchise quarterback. I think he's going to be a solid backup for many, many years. And we're going to have to see. Maybe a guy that's going to be on this list in a little bit could be their quarterback next year, a guy that currently plays in Chicago. But your thoughts here about Kenny Pickett and his smaller hands?
I think Kenny, just like you just said, he'll probably have his career being a backup. And I think, with Pittsburgh, I personally think, Pittsburgh has, solid enough offensive and defensive talent, for a quarterback to play somewhat decent, which is why I have him so low. I thought Kenny Pickett played absolutely terrible this year.
Yeah. This is definitely a step back from last year. And this year he got more help than ever with, of course,
Yeah.
the emergence of a guy like George Pickens. But Kenny Pickett, like we mentioned, he's going to have a long career. Just not going to be a starter, right? He could be the next Jimmy G is a good way to put it. But then we go over to 28, and this is Mac Jones territory. And like I mentioned before, just a little bit ago, if guys like Gardner Minshew, guys like Jake Browning, and guys like Joe Flacco were included on this list, Mac Jones wouldn't have made it for me, in all honesty. But this is a guy that does do well within structure. And in Mac Jones's defense, New England has kind of been a mess since his rookie year. Even though they've had a solid defense, they've had no help offensively. And, Ramondre Stevenson, is great, but he can only do so much. And this year, Mac Jones's best options offensively were way past his prime Ezekiel Elliott and Ramondre, who was battling injuries throughout the year. So in his defense, he hasn't had much help since he's made his debut in the league. But any pushback here about Mac Jones, I see we're pretty similar on where he's ranked.
Yeah, I think for Mac Jones, just like you just said, I really feel bad for him because his rookie year, you saw some great flashes. Like the dude, was really solid, and I think the Patriots saw enough to eventually work with this guy. He kind of showed resemblances of a young Brady, but I think that the system failed him, and it's kind of hard to rank these guys because I'm going based off of what I've seen, and based off of what I've seen, he hasn't played good, so that's why I have him so low.
Yeah, and that's, you touched on it there. It's just situation is kind of, it plays a huge part in these rankings as much as we don't want it to. It's like it's hard to rank someone a place where they, shouldn't be or a higher place in
Right.
the rankings when, they just haven't shown that, at all. So, there's just some guys above these guys here at the bottom that, whether if they're in a similar situation, they've just made a couple more plays or they've shown a lot more potential. At number 27, Bryce Young. I have him at 30 just because even though he did have a terrible situation around him from the head coaching spot down, from the GM spot down, it was just a losing culture. It was a terrible culture, terrible I guess continuity within the entire organization. Bryce Young, he didn't have a great counting stats season. He didn't have a great, eye test season, but it was year one. Rookie quarterbacks typically struggle. And again, he didn't have much help around him. His number one option was Adam Thielen. Amir, that guy is way past his prime. He still had a great game.
Right.
But if a 30-year-old slot receiver in Adam Thielen is your number one, you're not lined up for having a great successful season, is a good way to put it. But your thoughts here about the former number one overall pick. Can he bounce back here in the future?
Yeah, I think for Bryson, I think he can this year. I don't see Carolina making a huge jump. But I see Bryce Young, showing some more flashes. He finally has a coach, who resurrected Geno's career, who also got Baker's career back on track. And I
Yeah.
think, the Panthers are finally heading in the right direction. I
Yeah.
think what they need to do is go ahead and just build around them, build weapons around them, and, try to draft some talent in the O-line.
Yeah, you touched on it there with the new head coaching hire. I think it is huge, and I forgot to mention that, but I'm glad you did here. Of course, you're keeping me on my P's and Q's. At number 26, a guy that likes mayo in his coffee. Will Levis, from having the viral clip on draft day, a lot of people said he's the next draft bust because of his arm talent. He's the next Zach Wilson, and he might be. However, I think that when he stepped in for this Tennessee offense, they looked completely different. We saw Chigo Konku finally untap some of his potential. We saw Treylon Burks have a couple of good weeks there, and I mean Hopkins looked like DeAndre Hopkins when Will Levis was the quarterback. We touched on it there with Sam Howell. This is another gunslinger. But I think Will Levis is really the guy for Tennessee going forward. I don't think they're going to draft a quarterback. I don't think they're going to sign a quarterback. I think Will Levis is going to be their guy going forward. Now, again, he might be the next Kirk Cousins, right? Where he's just or Jared Goff level, where he's never a top 10 guy. But I think he can be a solid quarterback for this team for a long time. Maybe kind of like a next Ryan Tannehill. But I think Will Levis is the guy. He showed a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see what he can do in the future. But your thoughts here about the former Kentucky Wildcat here for the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, so Tannehill, in his offense, you kind of look at this year, and this Tennessee team looked dead when he was playing. It seemed like they had no motivation, no energy, no grit. The second Will Levis came in, I feel like he changed that culture, and I think he showed enough, for Tennessee to be like, okay, we're honestly comfortable with saying, giving this guy a chance, giving him a legit chance, and just like you just touched on it, when he was in the offense, offensively, passing wise, the receiving core looked different. They looked a lot more confident, a lot better. And I think, for Tennessee, they should, probably sign like a veteran quarterback, to back up and kind of help mentor him, to kind of help, get him better.
Yeah, absolutely. Levis has a lot of potential, and as much as I hate to admit it, he could be their guy going forward. At number 25, a guy that got a bag just this time last year for the New York Giants after leading them to a playoff win, and he's fell down the rankings. I'll say that. He's at 25 for us. Daniel Jones, some people call him Vanilla Vic. He's coming off an injury. Amir, do you think this is the guy that can bounce back? Do you think, I guess I'll ask you this. Do you think if you're the New York Giants GM, after paying Daniel Jones that much money, you have a top 6 pick, do you go all in, trade for one of these top 3 quarterbacks, or do you stand put with Daniel Jones and give him one more shot here going into 2024?
Personally, I think the biggest mistake that the Giants made was trying to build off of, and pretty much go with the same mantra as last year. I think last year was kind of a fluke. I think they made a huge mistake of paying him this much money. And so, if I'm New York, it's kind of a tough situation. You don't want this money to go to waste. He's not going to really have much, trade value because of this contract. And so, I think for New York, I think they might have to go and draft, a younger quarterback to kind of challenge him for that starting spot. I think
Yeah,
they'll have to.
I think at number 6, they're in a position where they might be in a position where Jaden Daniels out of LSU, a guy that might have the most potential at the quarterback position in the draft class. Of course, that's probably arguable, and it's probably Caleb Williams. But if Jaden Daniels can maybe fall to 6, maybe the Patriots go with Marvin Harrison at 3. Maybe Malik Neighbors goes to 4 to the Arizona Cardinals. And who knows, if the Chargers, they don't need a quarterback. What if they, go Joe Alt, or if they go a Brock Bowers at 5? Jaden Daniels could find his way into the lap of the New York Giants. And then you got 2 quarterbacks there where, you can decide who is our guy going forward. But I think in their best, I think the most likely situation is they're going to have to draft a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze. And I think just getting Daniel Jones one more shot. And of course, I forget the coach's name, Brian Daboll. I think going into this year, you should give both of those guys one more shot. And if they fall flat on their face, you just reset. I think you can get rid of Daniel Jones after this year. Also, you can get rid of Brian Daboll if that is the route you want to go, and just reset going into next year. But who knows? Maybe next year you don't have the talented quarterback prospects like we do this year. But moving over to the next set of 8, Anthony Richardson. I am higher on this guy than Amir, and of course, we got such a small sample size, so it's kind of it's hard to put this guy over. It's hard to make a legitimate argument, from an NFL perspective to have him over guys like Daniel Jones, over guys like even a Will Levis who had a bigger sample size. But Anthony Richardson, to me, in those first 4 games, especially his debut game against the Texans, man, that dude was just electric. He really played like a young Cam Newton. And even though we only got a month out of Anthony Richardson, I think he has proven he's going to be a force to be reckoned with going forward. And, if he didn't get hurt, maybe, Amir, who knows? We could be sitting here having a conversation on who's the best quarterback in the AFC South. Is it Lawrence? Is it Stroud? Or is it Anthony Richardson? I think, that division is set from the quarterback position going forward. I just think Anthony Richardson has a lot of untapped potential, and I want to just see him healthy. So I have him a little bit higher than you. But your thoughts here about the quarterback out of Florida?
Yeah, so AR, he passes the eye test in every area. And, for him, in my opinion, he's kind of a boom or bust. He's either going to be really, really good in the league or kind of a bust. And, I think the sample size is way too small for me to move him higher. I can understand why you would put him at 22 because, looking at him, the potential is through the roof. Just like you just said, in my opinion, I see Cam Newton, but with better arm talent.
Yeah.
And so, I think for Anthony Richardson, he has a great team around him now. Not great team, but, a great coach around him, a great culture. And I think the Colts going into this year, I think they're going to be very solid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also a guy that's, coming into the league, he had a lot of accuracy questions about him. Is he going to be, accurate enough to, play at the NFL level? And I think he came in and blew all of our expectations out the water. He's played better than we all thought he would. And also, I just think he opens up that offense in a variety of ways. I honestly, Amir, I would love to see a Kyle Pitts trade to the Indianapolis Colts. But I don't think that's going to happen now because they got a new head coach there in Atlanta. But I think a guy like Kyle Pitts could really open up this offense. But I think the most important thing, they need to figure out what they're going to do with Michael Pittman here in just a couple weeks. And then at number 23, Geno Smith. This is a guy that I think they finally wrote back, Amir. I think they finally wrote back. He had a crazy year 2 years ago. Led the Seahawks to the playoffs. Had a crazy year, even though he fell off towards the tail end of the season. But this year came in and played, relatively similar, but definitely took a step back in production. The team eventually would put Drew Lock in over him because of an injury. And Drew Lock looked pretty good in his time that he was the starter there for Seattle. Even had a game-winning drive. I think a 90-plus yard game-winning drive against the Eagles, if you remember. But Geno Smith, I think, he was just solid. He took a step back in production, but he's in a position where, I think the Seahawks kind of projected this because they gave him a team-friendly contract where they can get rid of him this year, they can get rid of him next year. Regardless, I think he'll be in Seattle for at least one more year. But your thoughts here about the guy that thinks that they didn't write back?
I think Seattle kind of played it smarter with not, kind of, forcing away, like kind of like how the Giants, forced a contract to Daniel Jones. I think Seattle kind of played it smarter. But, in my opinion, the dude played 10 years in the league and then, finally had a breakout season. And I think Seattle, kind of put too much hope in him. And so if I'm Seattle, I'm going after a quarterback in free agency, preferably a guy like Kirk Cousins, which, I don't think he's going to go to Seattle. I think he's going to go somewhere else. I'll talk about that later. And, I think, for Seattle, I think just the team in general just seemed different. Like DK didn't look the same. And Tyler Lockett didn't look the same. The whole chemistry, everything looked off. But, I think going into this year, I think you should pick up somebody else to kind of challenge him, kind of see what he does. If he's making a – honestly, I'm not that high on Drew Lock.
Yeah.
I'm not that high on Drew Lock.
Yeah, I'm not either. I just I wanted to throw it out there because he did have flashes there. I don't know. We'll have to ask the expert in Zaire about what his team should do next year. Maybe they trade up for Caleb Williams, right? At number 22, we have Derek Carr, a guy that we both have very similar in the rankings, and a guy that's signed a big contract with the New Orleans Saints after he was traded there this time last year. Derek Carr, I think, had a very solid season. He had a very Derek Carr season. It just wasn't elite, but it was far from terrible. And he had this team one game out of the playoffs. I think, I will say, maybe he underperformed a little bit when we look at it and say, the team that made the playoffs only had 9 wins. Derek Carr should have gotten this veteran roster to the playoffs. But, I think, when we look at just from an individual perspective, Derek Carr did have a solid season. And I'm just not a big fan of his head coach and Dennis Allen. But, hey, that's a different conversation for a different day. Derek Carr, I think, was solid this year, and they need to get him some more weapons here offensively. But your thoughts here about the New Orleans Saint quarterback?
I thought he was solid. I mean, that's really it. I mean,
Yeah,
solid, I guess. I mean,
yeah,
the whole entire Saints team is just solid, I guess.
yeah,
The whole division is solid, I guess. I think Derek Carr should have found a way to, win that division, in my opinion. I mean, the defense, was pretty good all year long. Despite him not really having many weapons offensively, I think they still should have found a way to, win that division. And,
yeah,
personally, I mean, I thought for the longest, I mean, they were going to win the division over Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay kind of showed some very, very bottom moments throughout the year, which I thought New Orleans was pretty much going to run away with that division. And I thought, Derek Carr kind of set them back at times.
yeah, yeah. At times, he definitely did. I'd be looking out for them next year, but it just, unfortunately for their future, they're in such salary cap hell that
Yeah,
this
that's
is
a
a
huge
team that,
problem.
yeah, this is the future doesn't look bright. Derek Carr is going to have to figure this out. At number
Yeah.
21, a guy that has been in the news a lot, whether if it's on the Amon-Ra St. Brown's Bros podcast, that was a mouthful, pause. But I think he's just been in the news a lot, talking about why he unfollowed the Bears on all social media, why he's keeping out of the media, and why he just talked about it on the podcast, why he's already thinking about, hey, I want to be a Chicago Bear, but I'm already thinking about maybe some other potential places I could play in 2024. The Bears have the number 1 overall pick. And the rumor as of right now is that they're going to take Caleb Williams and reset that quarterback clock so they don't have to pay Justin Fields $30+ million. They could wait another 4 or 5 years to pay Caleb Williams, which is why Caleb Williams will be a Chicago Bear. Justin Fields could go to the Atlanta Falcons, Pittsburgh Steelers. Amir, your thoughts here about the dynamic quarterback. Can he be a franchise quarterback for a franchise going forward?
The term franchise quarterback, when I think about that term, I think of a long-term guy. I'm thinking like, almost 10 years, a decade for, a team. And, for Justin Fields, if I'm Chicago, personally, I would move on. I would trade him, get some value from him instead of paying him. I think Caleb Williams is too good to pass up. I think Justin Fields up to this point, despite the team, not being, good around him, I think he's kind of showed enough to this point where it's kind of like, okay, like we really don't want to pay this guy. We're better off just going to Caleb Williams, who is probably going to be a better quarterback,
Right.
better value, and especially because I mean the second half of the season, this Bears defense played great. They played a lot better on both sides of the ball, and so I think you should go ahead and just bring in, go ahead and bring in Caleb Williams, a new guy, trade Fields, help him out, help him find a new type of scenery for himself, which I think he
Right.
needs, and I think that's probably the best scenario for the Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also have pick number 9, so they can go out there and get some extra protection for them.
Yep.
Or they can go grab a guy like Malik Neighbors out of LSU, or a guy like Roma Dunze to really solidify this receiving core for whether it's Justin Fields or Caleb Williams. You have a great supporting cast around whatever quarterback you decide to roll with in 2024. At number 20, we have a guy in Russell Wilson. He could be on the move. He could be staying. Sean Payton doesn't know what he's doing right now, which is a shame because I liked him when he was there in New Orleans for many, many years. Who knows? Maybe it was just Drew Brees making him look good. But Russell Wilson, he had a very solid counting stat season, and me and you were a little bit different on Russ, as he's one of the 4 guys that we have the biggest difference on in rankings. But Russell Wilson, I just think that it's he missed a lot of throws, and in a Sean Payton offense where you're really relied on to just take what the defense gives you, check down a lot. Russell Wilson sometimes just didn't do that. And of course, we see the montages over the last 2 years where he's just missing throws that he never missed when he was in Seattle. So maybe it's just the step that he's taken back. But overall, I'm happy with him at number 20. I don't want to rank him any lower because he is a Hall of Famer, but I just can't rank him any higher as of right now because the last 2 years just haven't been amazing. At least, I don't know. At the same time, he's had some splash plays. But your thoughts here about Russell Wilson?
Yeah, so I thought Russ played solid this year. I wouldn't say great, but I think he deserved to move his way up. I thought he obviously played so much better than last year, which isn't saying a lot because last year was terrible.
But he did. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought throughout this year, I mean, Russ was like making a serious case for being like a really good quarterback. I think for him, I kind of feel bad for him because I feel like the Broncos and Sean Payton were kind of trying to find a scapegoat. They kind of forced him out. I think for Denver, I think Denver's cooked. I mean, I think they need to rebuild, start completely fresh. I'm curious to see where Russ goes, but I think, wherever he goes, he'll play even better than he did this past year.
Yeah, no, I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be a Denver Bronco here in a couple weeks, or could be someone else. Maybe they go after a Bo Nix or something. But I think definitely Denver's going to be in the market for a quarterback or not. Maybe they roll with Jarrett Stidham going into 2024. Maybe he's their guy, or maybe we're overlooking a guy like Jarrett Stidham. At number 19, it's got to be the most controversial player on this list, not only for his off the field actions, but for his on the field play. This is a guy that received a bag, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, and he hasn't really played at all in his time as the Cleveland Brown. Deshaun Watson, a guy that this year had a winning record. I think it was like what, 5-1 or 6-1.
Yep,
He
5-1.
played very solid, and he beat the Baltimore Ravens, a team that made it, to the final 8 teams in the NFL. Deshaun Watson has the potential. We know the quarterback he can be, but he hasn't been, consistently for the Cleveland Browns. The only thing I'll say, Amir, extra here is that we just haven't seen him be healthy for a month straight since he's been a Cleveland Brown. And I think that's just a real problem because no matter how much time you take off, playing NFL quarterback is one of the hardest things to do in the entire world, at least in the world of sports. But your thoughts here about Deshaun Watson? Can he bounce back? Do you think he's going to be worth that contract here for us Browns fans?
Personally, I don't think anyone's worth that contract unless you are a top 3 quarterback. I mean, that's literally, the most guaranteed money in NFL history. But
Yeah.
I think Deshaun will be better this year. I think the fact that we go ahead and pick up Dorsey for our coordinator job. I think that's more friendly to his play style. Playing more spread. Playing from out from in shotgun. I think also going into this year, the O line is also going to be healthier. The team is going to be healthier, and so I think for Deshaun, this is his make or break year. If he plays bad, man, Cleveland's going to have a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
He's going to be the biggest dead cap in the league, just sitting there,
Yeah.
and a lot of just potential, just wasted, I guess is a good way to put it. But that's what happens when you take, when you mess up off the field, whether if it was true or not, and 800 days are taken off of football. It's just, it's not an easy position to play. And even though he's that talented, again, 800 days is 800 days.
Yeah, it's a lot
That's
of time
2
off.
years plus to take off from the game of football. At number 18, I think this is disrespectful. I think he's a top 5 quarterback. Kyler Murray. No, I'm just playing. But I really like Kyler Murray. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. A guy that is smaller in frame, smaller in size, but he fights, man. He fights. And even though, look, this is a guy that has had teams around him. He's had, the talented crews around him. A couple years back, this was a guy that led a team that was 8-1, 9-1 at one point. They crumbled second half of the season, and I think Kyler Murray should have stepped up in those games. But I think he's still an uber talented quarterback, and even when he came back this year, he won the Cardinals some games, and that was a team that was winless before Kyler Murray. I think he's just super talented, and as long they have a lot of cap space, so if they can surround him with some pieces, especially bringing back Marquise Brown, I think this team can make some noise next year. Maybe not a playoff team, but maybe right outside the horizon. But your thoughts here about Kyler Murray?
Yeah, I think for Kyler, just like you just say, the recent, a couple years ago, I think it was 2021, he kind of crumbled the second half of the season. And ever since then, he kind of been plagued with injuries. The team has fallen apart. And, I think, if Arizona could bring back Greg Little, Marquise Brown, I think the Cardinals could somewhat, take a step forward. The biggest concern that I have, I feel like Kyler isn't all in on Arizona. I think he wants a new change, a new scenery. And so I think eventually that might hurt the team in the long run.
Yeah. But, they paid him a lot of money. They kind of have to ride this ship out, at least for 2 more years. At number 17, though, he was on the thumbnail. And I think this guy has the most range on this list as far as where he could be at the top or at the bottom in Tua Tagovailoa, depending on your belief on playoff success. But this is a guy that, is super accurate, right? He has a solid arm. And he also has one of the most creative offensive minds in the league next to him. Also, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, maybe the most talented receiver duo in the league. I'll say it. It's the most talented receiver duo in the league. This dude has everything, behind him. I will say I'm happy and I'm proud of this dude for coming back this year after contemplating retirement and leading his team to the playoffs. But just like last year, he crumbled and he wasn't there when his team needed him the most. And that's kind of been a recurring trend for this Miami Dolphins team. So much so that some insiders believe they're going to be looking at a guy like Michael Penix to replace Tua here in this offseason. Who knows what's going to happen with Tua? But your thoughts here about Tua Tagovailoa? That's great analysis.
For Tua, last year I kind of had his back. I was kind of,
Me
on the
too.
side, I mean,
Me too.
because exactly, because Miami started off like with 8-1, 9-1, and looked elite. Like they had some really, really nice games, and he was an MVP candidate, before he got hurt. But this year, he took a huge step back. Obviously, the Dolphins' O line was absolutely, kind of inconsistent when it comes to pass blocking this year. And the defense is hurt all year long. But I mean, the biggest question we had for Tua was, can he win big games? And in those big games, he crumbled. I mean, he played terrible against Buffalo
Yeah.
twice. I mean, he played terrible against the Jets. He played horrible against KC, both games in the regular season and playoffs. And I think for the Dolphins, personally, I'm looking at this team and I'm questioning, can this guy get us over the hump?
Yeah. This is a guy, you touched on it there, where, he beats the teams he's supposed to beat, right? The teams that have a worse record than him. But this year, there was that stat where they didn't beat a team with an above 500 record, at least until like late in the season. That just can't happen when you're supposed to be a Super Bowl championship level team. And Tua is just not stepping up in those big games. And like you said there, it's not only that he's losing these big time games, he's playing terribly in them, to the point where he doesn't even give his team a chance. But Tua Tagovailoa definitely a serviceable quarterback, and we'll have to see what happens in Miami in his future. Moving over to the second half of the list, we're going to start with the former Cleveland Brown, Baker Mayfield, a guy that I loved when we were winning with the Cleveland Browns, and he's a guy that I always explain to people that you love to win with him, right? He's definitely a give and take situation at the quarterback position, but this year, I think facing all the questions that he did, he stepped up and he played up and he lived up to those expectations because he led this team, a team that was in the Super Bowl a couple years back, to the playoffs, and he beat the reigning NFC champions in the first round of the playoffs in dominant fashion. This is the guy that stepped up and played huge this year, and I think he just deserves his flowers. So Baker Mayfield, great job stepping up, and you're at number 16 officially, an above average quarterback in both of our lists.
Yeah,
What about
great
yours?
job to Baker. Shout out Baker. I think the only reason why he's at 17 for me was just because I mean the Buccaneers team had a lot of questions throughout the year. His play was kind of inconsistent at times. Kind of a roller coaster ride. And like it was a point in the season where we did not think the Bucs were even going to make the playoffs. But I think he did a good job prevailing, good job. Second half of the year stepping up, and then absolutely steamrolling the Eagles.
Yeah, they had a rough start to the year, but like you talked about, great end to the year, and that's all that matters. It's not about how you start; it's how you finish. Not to be cliche, right? At number 14B, we're gonna have Captain Kirk Cousins. If the screen will load, there we go. This is a guy that is a pending free agent, so we don't know where he's gonna go. I'm assuming he's gonna go back to Minnesota. It seems they have a great bond there in Minnesota, but we don't know. Could he be, in Seattle? Could he be in Denver? There's could he even take over in a place like there's multiple places like a place like New England, right? Kirk Cousins is definitely an interesting free agent. I think he might be the best at the quarterback position as a free agent. But I think he's just very solid. He's underrated, and he's at number 14 for me, 14 for you as well. Your thoughts here about Captain Kirk? Is he going to return to be Kirk O'Chains here in Minnesota?
I think Kirk is the most overhated quarterback in the league. I think he is a great quarterback, and it's crazy because I mean, this man has Benjamin Button disease. He's getting older and getting better at the same
Yeah.
time. And for Kirk, he's in my opinion the most valuable free agent, this year.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell if he's gonna go back to Minnesota. I'm not really sure. But I think for him, I think Minnesota's kind of crumbling. I mean, they've struggled, big time. And I think for Kirk, if I'm him personally, I will go to Atlanta. Atlanta has everything he needs. In an easier division, you get to stay in the NFC, which is the easier side of the conference. You got some great offensive weapons, and Atlanta's a quarterback away from making some damage. So if I'm him, I will go to Atlanta. But I think he'll end up signing to Minnesota again.
I see the intrigue of what you're saying here, but I personally like Kevin O'Connell as a head coach. I think you have Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in football, and Jordan Addison, one of the best rookie receivers in football, and not to mention a top 3 tight end with a decent offensive line. You would leave that here for Atlanta with Raheem Morris as a first-time head coach?
Well, I mean, the thing about Minnesota this year, when Kirk Cousins played, I mean, they literally looked like they were just like, all over the place.
Yeah.
Obviously, Kirk played great, but the defense played terrible. And, I think Minnesota's is a roller coaster ride. It's weird because once Josh Dobbs stepped in, the defense looked elite. It's like a 5-game stretch. It's kind of all over the place. And, I think for Kirk, it kind of seems like the fans and the team itself are kind of like iffy about him.
Yeah, and I think they have a lot of questions this offseason, no doubt about it, with Kirk Cousins, with Daniel Hunter, of course, and Harrison Smith is not going to be a Minnesota Viking, whether if he's going to retire or move on. He's already kind of, let it be known that, hey, I'm not going to be returning to be a Viking. So they are definitely entering a new chapter. It's going to be interesting to see if Kirk Cousins is going to be here to at least spell the next quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. At number 14A, it is Jaylen Herz, a guy that, 2 years ago, this would have been an outrageous take to have him not inside the top 10 because he led the Eagles to the Super Bowl. He did it in such dominant fashion through the air, on the ground. And then this year, we have, hey, you play to those expectations. We're going to hold you to those expectations. So we expected him this year to play at least at that level or maybe a little bit less, but he didn't do either of those. He took a major step back statistically. On the ground, he was still okay, right? But this year, this team still had it all. Offensively, defensively, they started 10-1 or 11-1, something absolutely insane. But this team, from the head coaching spot down, just kind of crumbled. It's like the team just randomly lost hope in midway through the season, which I still don't understand why, because they were 10-1, they looked
Because
dominant
of
on
Brock
both
Purdy.
sides. I guess maybe it was that loss to Brock Purdy. I just don't understand why they lost so much confidence in the head coaching staff and the quarterback. Regardless, Jaylen Hurts definitely turned the ball over a lot more than he ever has in his career, and just a lot of it added to the pile. It added to the fire of what happened to this team second half of the year. But I still think he is talented, and I would go to war with a guy like Jaylen Hurts. Your thoughts here about Jaylen Hurts? Can he bounce back?
I think he's still, talented and he can bounce back. I think, he was a big part of the Eagles collapse. And, for him, even if you look at the stats, I mean, statistically, through that 10-1 stretch, despite them having a gauntlet for that second half of the year, I mean, like they were barely hanging on to those games. And it was mainly because of Hurts. Hurts was starting those games off poorly, turning the ball over, missing reads, missing throws. And, that kind of caused the team to sort of hang on to these games, having to come back every single game. Eventually they ran into Brock Purdy, arguably the greatest, quarterback in Niners history. And and so, you run into a team like that and you get absolutely blown out by 30, 30 points, that really just depletes all confidence. And after that, they fell apart.
Yeah, just so you guys know at home, Amir will be on meds here pretty soon. But you want to talk about the greatest 49ers quarterback in history? Let's talk about him here. As he's at number 13, I had him at 15, you had him at 9. It is the tied for the second biggest difference we have as far as quarterbacks here on our entire list. I am at 15 because, hey, I think, if I need from a one season perspective, if I'm starting a team, I would take Jaylen Hurts and Kirk Cousins over him, right? Just because of Kirk Cousins is basically Brock Purdy, but a little bit better, at least at this point in their careers. And Jaylen Hurts just has that dynamic ability with his legs that I think, he can bounce back. I think what we saw 2 years ago is more so Jaylen Hurts than what we saw last year. And I would go to war with those guys over a guy like Brock Purdy. That was my basic argument. And but I still think, hey, he's solid, and he's the reason this team made it to the Super Bowl. Don't let people convince you that this team would have made it without him. So your thoughts here about Brock Purdy, and why is he a top 10 quarterback in your eyes?
And, in my opinion, I think he showed enough up to this point. And, the reason why I would have him over a guy like Hurts is because, when all things went bad, they both responded in two completely different ways. Jalen Hurts crumbled. Brock Purdy responded. The biggest question for him, in this Niners team going into the playoffs was, all right, how's he going to react? You go ahead and you go to that first game versus Green Bay. It was bad conditions, rainy weather. It obviously took him some time to get going, but, he had a game-winning drive. And you go ahead and play against Detroit. The second half of the game, you have a perfect QBR and help lead that comeback, despite some stuff going your way. I mean, you go ahead and get, arguably the best defense in the playoffs. You literally play better than Lamar, Josh Allen, and Tua did against that defense. I think Brock Purdy showed enough for me to put him in the top 10.
Absolutely. And again, no pushback from me. It's really just a personal thing when it comes down to it. I think, I don't have anything personal. I don't have a personal vendetta against Brock Purdy, right? But I just, there's some other guys I think are either more talented or I think if put in the similar situation, they would have played at that level. And that's really what my argument is against Brock Purdy. At number 12, we have Jared Goff, a guy that, of course, you had Brock Purdy ahead. I had Jared Goff here just at number 12. But this is the guy that is just underrated. You want to talk about underrated. Even in Los Angeles, where, he kind of played just okay, mediocre at best. He then gets shipped from that big market to a small market, a team that he was kind of sent to, I guess, in a way, die there in Detroit. And this is a guy that came to play, and he's been the reason this team has been, he has really changed the tide there in Detroit. I think he's just very underrated. He does exactly what you need him to do on a game-to-game basis. And I think he's just severely underrated in all aspects of being a quarterback and a leader. So Jared Goff to me is at number 12. Top 12 quarterback for me, no doubt about it. But your thoughts here for the quarterback that, if his head coach had a better analytics team, maybe he was the guy representing the NFC in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think Jared Goff, like you just said, shout out to him for kind of going to Detroit and, helping them out. I think that's for him. He kind of showed points in the season where he kind of dwindled. And, I think, the reason why I have Purdy ranked over him is because, you can make the argument that Detroit offensively is up there, one of the most stacked offenses. You got the best running back duo. You got the best O-line in football. You got Amon-Ra, which in my opinion is a top 5 receiver. He's completely underrated. And then you got Sam Laporta, who came into the league and, had the greatest rookie receiving tight end season ever. True. And so, I think for Jared Goff, they both got similar situations. And I thought Brock Purdy all around, put together a better season than he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely an argument, especially for that last point you just made. That's actually a really, really good point. At number 11, though, we have Jordan Love, the greatest Packer quarterback in NFL history, greatest Packer quarterback in franchise history. No, in all seriousness, this is a guy that, Amir, 4 or 5 years ago, we were doing some Madden franchises for you guys at home. Some of you guys at home do those as well with your friends. I was drafting this dude, Jordan Love, out of Utah State. I saw him, and I was like, it's just one of those feelings you get about a player, right? Right now I'm going through my draft process, for this upcoming draft. But it's just one of those things where I saw Jordan Love. I saw a couple of his games. I'm like, this dude's going to be an NFL star. No matter where he goes, I think this dude could take over and be one of the next great quarterbacks. And I told you guys in the group chat, and I would draft him in every Madden franchise. This is a guy that I've just been a big believer in since Utah State 4 or 5 years ago. And he's come, and, he came into the league. He spent his time learning from maybe, one of the most talented quarterbacks ever in Aaron Rodgers. And now it's his time to shine. And I think leading this team to the second round of the playoffs after being the first 7 seed to ever win a playoff game in NFL history against a top 5 defense in the playoffs, to win that game and put up 50 points in that one, then go to the second round. And I will say, if he didn't channel his inner Brett Favre in that second half, this team would have made it to the NFC Championship game where, hey, you're going up against a division rival in the Detroit Lions, Anything can happen in a divisional matchup. Who knows, man? Crazier things have happened is what I'm going to say. I'm not even going to say that they could have made it to the Super Bowl, but I just think that from talent perspective, that's just how comfortable he was in the second half of the season. I think this dude is the next great Packer quarterback, and he is everything that I thought he would be, at least at this point in his career. Your thoughts here about Jordan Love? I know I kind of went on a bit of a ramble there.
Yes, Owen actually was right. And, I think for Jordan Love, the only reason why I have him at 12, I wouldn't be mad if somebody has him at a top 10 quarterback, but I kind of have him and Stroud right there just because, I think, only seeing him for a season is kind of a sample size. I think it's a big difference between someone playing better and actually being better. And, I think, just because of the first half, Jordan Love kind of started off slow due to all the injuries and all that stuff. But the second half, he played absolutely elite. And so, I think going into next year, if he puts it all together, like how he did the second half of the season, I think he'll undoubtedly be, a top 7 to top 5 quarterback easily. I have him and Stroud right next to each other just because, I kind of want to see them, do it for more than a season.
Yeah, and that's, a great point. The sample size is important, especially, whether we talk about college prospects or the NFL. But I really, some other things I like to throw out there and why, look, hey, we've only seen one starting year for this guy. And this is what I'm going to say to negate that sample size. He had the most O-line combinations in the NFL, and he didn't have David Bakhtiari for more than week 1. Maybe one of the most talented left tackles in the league. He didn't have him. He had the most offensive line combinations. He had one of the youngest wide receiver cores in the league without a true number 1. He had no tight end, really. Luke Musgrave was up and down the entire year. No running back, and a defense that has taken a step back over the years. They played good second half of the year. We'll give them that. But I just think there's a lot of factors that, to me, negate that, I guess, playing time stigma. But it's definitely a valid argument is why I'm not going to take that away from you. But at number 9B, Amir, Me and you talked about this for a while. We did not know where to rank this dude. We didn't know if we should
Yeah,
put
we
him
did
with
not. No,
Tua.
I had no idea.
We didn't know if we should put him like by Tua. We didn't know if we should have him as a top 5 quarterback. This is a guy that last year I struggled to rank. It is Trevor Lawrence. This is a guy that sunshine, of course. And there was ain't no sunshine there in Jacksonville for the majority of the season, as this is a team coming into the year. This was the team I was the most wrong about coming into the year. I thought they would have
Yeah,
won their division. I thought they would have won at least a playoff game or two, and I thought Trevor Lawrence would be in a position where we're saying, hey, this dude is one weapon away or one piece away, and this Jacksonville team is ready to win it all. They took a step back this year, and I think they took a step back in a big way. But Trevor Lawrence, the talent is still there, and that's kind of why, just by default, he's still a top 10 quarterback to me. But your thoughts here about Sunshine?
yeah. So I mean, these rankings are really hard to make. We really were talking about this, and I was I kind of had to sit down and look at the collection of his career and be like, I mean, this dude just hasn't got it done. And, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt, still ranking him top 10 because he kind of dealt with injuries the whole year.
Yeah.
The messed up MCL messed with him. And I think he had a shoulder injury, if I'm not mistaken.
Calvin really didn't look great.
Yeah, and so I think for him, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt by still putting him in the top 10, and put him over a guy who's next, which is going to cause some controversy. But yeah, I think Jacksonville. I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea about Trevor Lawrence. Hopefully, I'm wrong. Hopefully, he proves us wrong next year. But as of right now, I think he's barely hanging on to that top 10 spot, barely.
Yeah. And at number 9A is a divisional quarterback with Trevor Lawrence. And this is the guy, Amir. When I broke it down, there was a 7-spot difference in our rankings. This is the most disagreed quarterback on in our, this is in both of our lists. This is a guy that, to me, I'm going to throw it out there. It is C.J. Stroud. And I don't, look, from someone that I've said on this podcast, for, going into last year when I did these sets of rankings, I don't like to overreact to quarterbacks. Last year, you can argue I did it with Jaylen Herz, having him as a top 6 quarterback. I probably overreacted. This year, this might be the guy that I overreact to, but it's the fact that this team was 2-15 last year. 2-15. And this team comes into this year with no true number 1 wide receiver. Nico Collins eventually developed into be, right? Tank Dell, of course, was a late round pick that turned out to be great. Dalton Schultz was a guy that they just took a shot on because, hey, he was solid in Dallas. But this team was 2-15 last year. We don't see rookie quarterbacks come into the league and play at the level that C.J. Stroud did this year because he turned them from a 2-win team to a double-digit win team. And let's not forget that this team was like 1-2 or 1-3 without C.J. Stroud when he was out for those couple weeks throughout the later half of the season. This team could have been a 12-win ball club. And this is one of the youngest teams in the league with a first-year head coach. And this dude broke record after record after record. And then he went to the playoffs and beat maybe the best defense in football, the Cleveland Browns, with the defensive player of the year leading the charge in Myles Garrett. I just think this is the best, maybe the best rookie quarterback season we've ever seen. And CJ Stroud is a top 6 quarterback. I see it, and I think this guy is going to be, in the conversation with those top 3 guys, those consensus top 3 guys for years to come. But you have him at 13. You have 4 quarterbacks on this list over CJ Stroud. And why is that?
Yeah, kind of like what I said for Jordan Love. It's tough. I don't want to overreact to quarterbacks. Personally, I mean, his season alone was better than, honestly, some of these guys in the top 10.
Yeah.
You honestly listed some great points right there. And, me saying, he's the 13th best quarterback, he may or may not be. I think just, I just didn't want to jump the gun and put him over guys who kind of, who've played longer or who have kind of put more seasons together. That's the only reason why. I mean, and people have to understand these lists are really hard to make. You got to take in the injuries, factors, situations, and stuff like that. Honestly, I'm not mad he has him as top 6. I think 13 is probably a little egregious, but it's not me saying he's the 13th best quarterback. It's kind of me just not wanting to put him over guys who have put together seasons over time. Yeah.
And my only question here is I don't think it's crazy you have him at 13 either, just because it was only a 1-season sample size, and we see that second year is the most pivotal year for some of these young quarterbacks because now teams have film on you.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that too. It's tough because we see a lot of times. We saw with Baker. We also saw some other top quarterbacks. That second year, you come in, you're held to high expectations. Teams start really studying you, really breaking your film down, and knowing how to target you, knowing how to target your offense and shut everything down. And we see a lot of sophomore slumps. Do I think CJ Stroud will go into a sophomore slump? No, I don't think so. But you just never know with these 2-year quarterbacks.
Yeah. Now, this could have been a mistake, Amir, and I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But even as a Jordan Love fanatic, I want your opinion on that. I personally don't think he's shown as much as C.J. Stroud so far. Both great first-year starting quarterbacks. But why do you have Jordan Love above C.J. Stroud? I'm interested to see that because, of course, if you want to just keep boosting up my guy, I'm all ears. But why do you have Jordan Love above a guy like C.J. Stroud?
Just literally, just like you mentioned. I mean, his O-line was hurt all year long.
Yeah.
The defense played terrible the first half of the season. And, I mean, that Packers team was plagued with injuries. I want to say the second most injured team, in the league behind Cleveland. And, for Stroud, I mean, offensively, I mean, they were relatively healthy besides, Tank Dell.
Right.
Despite them being, only winning 2 games last year, seeing what Jordan Love did that second half of the year, I think it was absolutely absurd and elite. And also being in a tougher division, absolutely demolishing the Lions, in Detroit, and then going on to absolutely demolish, a fully healthy Cowboys team,
Yeah.
which, in my opinion, has a top 3 best roster in the league.
Yeah.
And so, I think, also for Jordan Love, I mean, he's also, been in the league longer. And so, I kind of had more favor towards him. But man, these rankings are really hard to rank, very tough. Like I just said, and honestly, I had no idea where to rank Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, or Trevor Lawrence.
Absolutely. It's kind of like that pack that we were talking about at the very bottom of the list. But let's get into the top 10, Amir. Well, we're in the top 10, but let's finish off in the top 8 here, is what I meant to say. At number 8, we have Dak Prescott, and this is the second most disagreed quarterback in our list. There's the second biggest range, where I have him at 11. You have him at 5. No doubt, this guy played his best career football this year. I think that includes his first year when he was in the MVP and Offensive Player of the Year race. But Dak Prescott, to me, with limited options, I think we overrate Brandon Cooks as a secondary receiver. I think we overrate, Jake Ferguson. If Jake Ferguson had he was very spotty throughout the entire year. Tony Pollard had a down year. CeeDee Lamb had a fantastic career year, right? But that's only one guy. And I think that this Dak Prescott came into the year with a banged up O-line and led this team to the playoffs. And I think, winning 12, 13 games, getting some big wins along the way helped that. But ultimately, what it came down to was just the same conversation with Trevor Lawrence, same conversation with a guy that's right above him in this list for me, and Tua. I think it's just when it comes down to it, when it matters most, and I'll give you credit with your guy like Brock Purdy, even, some of these guys have similar rosters. But when it comes down to it, when the going gets tough, Dak Prescott doesn't win those big time games. I don't think he's had a playoff win in his career, and if he did, it was his first year in the league. I just want a guy like Brock Purdy, when times got tough, when his team was down by double-digit points in 2 of those key playoff games, Brock Purdy kept them afloat, and he brought them back and won those games. Dak Prescott hasn't done that, and I just have him here because I know the talent is here. But like you see, also you have him here at 5, so. He, by the law of averages, he's a top 8 quarterback. Your thoughts here about Dak Prescott, though, and you have a little bit more confidence in him.
Yeah, I have him at 5, based off of the season he put together this year. Kind of like just, I think Brandon Cooks, had a huge fall off. I think he's a bit overrated. Tony Pollard was very disappointing in my opinion. Like people literally, wanted to get rid of Zeke, thinking Pollard was going to be a potentially an All-Pro this year. And I mean, the only, piece on that offense that was consistent was CD. And, I think for Dak, even going into that playoff game against Green Bay, yes, he threw 2 interceptions, but I mean, defensively, they were embarrassing. Honestly, defensively, they played embarrassing the whole year for them to have that much talent. I think for this Cowboys team, I think it's more so, more of a kind of a team disappointment rather than a Dak disappointment. You know what I mean? And I think Dak's only playoff win was against Tampa Bay some years back.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
But, Tampa Bay, but that's about it. But, I mean, I have him at 5. I mean, just based off of, this year he was an MVP candidate. Now, I thought he played good enough to kind of earn that 5th spot.
Individually, he definitely has an argument for a top 5 status. At number 6B, it's Justin Herbert. Same conversation as Trevor Lawrence, a guy that has had the teams, he's had the rosters, maybe not the head coaching, but he's had everything else. And they just haven't got it done when it matters most. Last year, they made it to the first round of the playoffs. They were the favorites, even though they were on the road in Jacksonville, taking on a team that barely made the playoffs in the Jaguars. and they were up by 26. They blew that lead, and the Jacksonville Jaguars came back, and Justin Herbert did not look like the same quarterback in that second half. This year, he comes back, and the only benefit I'll give him is the fact that Quentin Johnston was terrible in his rookie year, right? He showed no potential. And I tried to tell you guys in the draft process last year, but that's a different conversation for a different day. All I'm saying is tune in for some draft content. Mike Williams went down after like 2 weeks into the season. They didn't really have a tight end. Keenan Allen, sure, he's great, and he had a great season, but he's only one man, right? And Austin Eckler took a step back. That Brandon Staley is the worst head coach in the league. There was a lot of factors going against Justin Herbert, so I think the talent's still there, and I think this year, like we talked about for a couple other guys, is a make or break year now with a proven coach, at both levels of college and the NFL. Jim Harbaugh taking over as their head coach. Interesting to see if they go and grab more protection for him at number 5, whether if it's Brock Bowers, a great versatile tight end, maybe the greatest prospect we've seen since Kyle Pitts at that position, or they go and shore up the offensive line. Regardless of what they do, Amir, I think they have a lot of questions this offseason, and I think it's a make or break year for Justin Herbert in 2024. But your thoughts here about why he's a top 7 quarterback for you?
Yeah, he's had some solid rosters around him, but man, this year, I mean, he had the worst defense in the league. The defense was absolutely atrocious. Despite all the talent they have, they were terrible. That was absolutely embarrassing. Like you just said, Staley was a terrible coach. I think, offensively, Austin Eckler, I don't know what happened with him. He took a step back. Quentin Johnson, man, oh my gosh. Like I'm getting angry just thinking about how terrible they were. And, and the only person, that was somewhat decent on that offense was Keenan Allen, but he can only do so much. He's not a burner. He can't really stretch defenses out. He's kind of just an intermediate.
Not anymore.
Right, not anymore. And so, Mike Will ended up getting hurt too. And so, I think going into this year, you have a coach back. I'm curious to see what they try to target in the free agency and in the draft. I wonder if they'll kind of, try to get our receiver to kind of pick up after Keenan Allen, because, honestly, we don't know when he's going to start declining. Right. So, I'm kind of curious to see what they do. But, despite that, I think this is a make or break year. The Chargers got a new D coordinator, new coach. They still have a buttload of talent on both sides of the ball, which I think they will get better. But, I think this is a make or break year for him and Trevor Lawrence both.
Well, what I can promise you this is I think this is going to be a more run-focused offense, because that's always what Jim Harbaugh has been. So maybe statistically, Herbert takes a step back next year. But, again, he's one of those guys that we can, see, at times his talent is just that great. And he has those splash plays. But I will say they need to figure out what they're doing defensively, is a good way to put it. But another thing I can promise you, Blake Corum is going to be a Charger, most likely, here in 2024. At number 6A, it's going to be Matt Stafford, a guy that had a bit of a resurgence year. Of course, 2-3 years back, he won the Super Bowl. And if Cooper Kupp didn't go crazy, he would have been the MVP. But Matt Stafford, this is a guy that, for years in Detroit, suffered on a bad team, suffered in a bad situation, but he made the best of it. At least, what he did the best he could do in Detroit. He finds his way in LA, wins a Super Bowl. Last year took a step back because the roster, they lost a lot of key players, and he battled some spinal injuries himself. This year, though, he comes back, and, whether if it was great drafting, getting a guy, that 5th-round pick out of Yale, Amir, that you love, whether if it was Kyren Williams bursting out to the scene, or Cooper Kupp. Actually, I'll say that, too. Cooper Kupp was hurt this year, and this team still went to the playoffs with a rookie wide receiver really as their number one guy. And they almost beat the team that went to the NFC Championship game that could have went to the Super Bowl very easily if they kicked a field goal or two. I feel like we're going to keep saying that a lot throughout this offseason.
We are.
But the Matt Stafford here, your thoughts about him, and why is he still this high at his age, even though he's getting older?
Yeah, Matt Stafford, people tend to forget. He literally injured his elbow, first or second week of the season. And so, he started off, beginning the part of the season injured. Played with the injuries. Cooper Kupp, like you just mentioned, in and out of the lineup. You have a rookie running back who was finding his groove, finding his way. And, eventually, that second half of the season, similar to Jay Love, he played absolutely elite and lights out. And, us two and many other people had the Rams, potentially going to the NFC Championship.
We did.
I had them beating Detroit in Detroit, and they were honestly one defensive pass interference call away from going, in my opinion. And so, I think, Stafford is still elite. He's shown the flashes. And going into next year, once they figure out some pieces on the O-line and defensively, I think Matt Stafford's going to finally, get back in that top 5 conversation.
For the first time in Sean McVay's era as the head coach in Los Angeles, they have one of the most cap spaces in the NFL. And like we
Which is
seen a couple years
scary.
ago,
Which
which
is
was seen a
scary.
couple years ago, this team is not afraid to go all in on one
Yeah.
season and just to tear it down after. So next year, I honestly, it's going to be scary to see the Rams come back with a better version of Puka Nacua, which apparently, he's already in conversations for an elite guy at his position. At number 5, we have the old man, a guy that played, just about as much as me and you in the regular season last year. It wasn't his fault, right? He had an injury, but Aaron Rodgers is coming back at, I think he's 38 or 39 coming into this next year for the New York Jets. He has the roster, and this is a team that, yet again, is going to be in the conversations to win a Super Bowl next year. They have a top 10 pick. I think they can go out there and draft another offensive lineman, whether if it's Joe Alt, Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, or if they want to grab a guy like Talise Fuaga. I think this year they can shore up that offensive line in the offseason, and this is going to be an Aaron Rodgers that's coming back, got a full year of rest, coming off this injury. And I think he's going to be motivated because he still has that, thing around him where, he's a great quarterback, but he really needs that extra Super Bowl to give him over the hump. But your thoughts here about Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, this Packers team, or not Packers, but this Jets team has some great talent, for him to come back. And, honestly, an Achilles injury isn't that much for a guy that's not that mobile to begin with. And so, you look at Aaron Rodgers, his arm talent is still elite. Arm talent is definitely probably still going to be there. And, coming into this offense, you still got, I personally think next year he's going to turn Gary Wilson into a potential All-Pro.
Yeah.
You got Breece Hall, solid running back. You have some pieces. And on top of it, you have a top 5 defense as well. And I think for Rodgers is going to come back, not have to do too much. And the biggest concern that's been for his Packers teams was the defense kind of holding him back.
Yeah.
And so I think now that's not the case. It's not the problem. You have a true number 1 wide receiver. Just like you just mentioned, you have a top 10 draft pick to, go ahead and pick up an old lineman and start, solidifying his offensive line. And I think he's going to come back and still be a top 5 quarterback, no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. The most accurate quarterback in NFL history. I think there's no doubt about it. At number 4, Amir, I'm going to speak for the both of us here because I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Joel Embiid?
Joel Embiid is a great NBA comparison, but a guy that secured his second MVP this season, a guy that was the leader of the best overall regular season team. And of course, he did everything for this team in the first round of the playoffs, 4 total touchdowns, single-handedly got this team over the top in the divisional round, rather, over the Texans. But he fell short yet again. But that's the thing, is he's talented enough. We know, he's a 2-time MVP for a reason, but he just can't get over that hump, which seems to be the case for a lot of these quarterbacks. Any additional thoughts about Lamar here before we dive into maybe the most controversial part of the episode?
Yeah, not really. I think people, and I got a lot of hate for saying this. I think he's slightly overrated. I saw people rank him over Mahomes, this season alone. But Lamar, he's had the team. He's been loaded. And, it's crazy that one season people kind of forget, who should be ahead of him. We're going to get to that next. But, I think, Lamar just hasn't got it done in the playoffs. He's had the teams around him. His defense he's had a top 3 to top 5 defense every year he's been in the league. People kind of, blame his old coordinator. But I think this year, being at home, being favorites, having the best defense in the league, and, starting the game off, 6 for 15 against Kansas City and let Mahomes completely dominate you and outperform you in every way fashionable. I think that shouldn't have happened. And I think even in that second half, he had every chance to still go out and win that game, even when Kansas City's offense was moving slow. And I think that kind of, for me, set him back.
Yeah. And at number 2 and 3, this is maybe the biggest debate, of course, around the league. This is the updated version. This is the heightened version of the Drake May, Caleb Williams conversation. But it's really, who is going to be the second best quarterback of this generation? Is it going to be Josh Allen or is it Joe Burrow? To me, I'll make this pretty simple. If I was the defensive coordinator, and this is including Patrick Mahomes, the man I would be scared of the most if he was on the other team, down by a touchdown or to tied game to win the ball game, the person I'm scared of the most as a defensive coordinator is Joe Burrow. This is a guy that can make every throw on the football field. He's elite. And when he's been healthy, look, when this dude has been healthy for an entire season, he made it to the AFC Championship game, the Super Bowl, and the AFC Championship game when he's healthy. But when he's been hurt, of course, that has derailed his success. Joe Burrow is a winner, and I think I trust him more than a guy like Josh Allen. But overall, we have them both here at 2A and 2B. But your thoughts here, why is Josh Allen better than a guy like Joe Burrow?
Well, for Josh Allen, Josh Allen, has played great in the playoffs. I mean, if you look at his stats, he's played absolutely elite. You kind of look at his past 4 playoff losses. He hasn't been able to get past Mahomes, but it's like, his defense is averaging 34 points given up in his past 4 losses. I think, I saw a stat. It said Josh Allen is the only quarterback, I think in NFL history to account for, 50 total touchdowns in a season and not make the Super Bowl, and he's done that twice. Has literally done it twice. It's something crazy like that, like 50 total touchdowns.
I agree. All right, believe
it. Josh Allen has played great. I kind of look at Joe Burrow, and people tend to forget, as good as Joe Burrow was, in his Super Bowl run when he made the Super Bowl, he looked like he was human. He threw 2 picks in back-to-back games. His defense kind of helped him, get over the hump. Yes, he found a way to win, but it's like, his team has helped him a lot more than Josh Allen, in my opinion. I think these two are also interchangeable, but, for me, the fact that Joe Burrow, didn't play this year, and the fact that, he kind of started off slow, that's the only reason why I'm putting Josh Allen over him.
And number one, we're going to talk about maybe the
So
greatest
at number
football
one,
player
we
of all
have
time.
Juwan Jennings in the Super Bowl.
Juwan Jennings in the Super Bowl. I think you forget about Brian. What about Julian Edelman? I think we're forgetting about that. Trey Burton. What about the tight end that threw to Nick Foles in the Super Bowl? Come on, guys. You guys know this at home. You guys noticed. You knew it clicking on the video. You didn't even need to click on the video. Patrick Mahomes is number one. He's so great for so many reasons. We talked about maybe, his journey to being maybe the GOAT on last week's video. So if you want to, get more detail on that, go check that out. But Patrick Mahomes at number one, Amir, this is a guy that year in and year out, no matter what he has around him, gets it done, wins the Super Bowl, does it at the highest level. We talked about it this year. If he can get it done with this roster, for one, he can get it done with any roster. And two, It really puts him in that GOAT conversation. Any additional thoughts here about the best player in football?
Yeah, not really. I think he's already getting that convo. I wouldn't jump the gun and put him number one just yet. I was kind of leaning towards that. And I was like thinking like, yo, I might have to do it. But I was like, no, I'm not going to do it.
7 Super Bowls.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, 7 Super Bowls is absolutely crazy. I'm sorry, but like that in my mind is absolutely crazy. And I think, I think he's finally surpassed Montana, and I think he's only going to keep adding to that. And it's literally no debate.
Easily.
And it's crazy the fact that throughout the season, I had to literally debate with people that he was better than Lamar Jackson. And it's crazy that's even a debate. Mahomes is the best football we've seen, or best football player we've seen, in recent history.
Yeah, no, I think he's already a top 5 guy. I have him over Montana. I think he's in that conversation with Peyton Manning at this point in time. Maybe he's already solidified himself as number 2. Of course, that's a debate for another day. But Amir, we ranked all 32 quarterbacks. Of course, you could have had some of the backups in there, as it was the year of the backup. But we decided to keep those guys off. But draft season's around the way. We had some of those guys in here. And of course, we had a couple debates along the way, a couple great debates along the way. So you guys at home, let us know what you guys think in the comments. But Amir, any last thoughts before we get out of here? Another a great episode in the books.
That was a great, fun episode. I'm looking forward to next week's stuff. Like me and Evan and Sam, we have some great stuff planned. Great stuff planned.
Yeah, absolutely. So stay tuned for that. And without further ado, we'll see you guys next week for some great content, and be on the lookout for some more draft content on the way. But until then, we're out of here.